A black boy stands quietly in the hallway of a suburban middle school, rain dripping from the sleeves of his hoodie. His sneakers are soaked. His backpack is frayed, but he's early. He always is. A white man in a crisp blue tie rounds a corner. He stops, his eyes narrow. "What are you doing here?" The principal barks across the hallway, voice echoing off the lockers. The boy doesn't answer. He just shifts his weight, looking down. The principal walks closer, louder now. "You think you can just walk and dress like that? This isn't your kind of place. Where's your hall pass?" Teachers peek from open classroom doors. Students pause. Some smirk. Others stay silent. The principal shakes his head in disgust. "You kids think this is a street. This is a school. You want to be treated with respect? Start looking like you belong here." But what no one in that hallway knows, what even the boy hasn't told anyone yet, is that his mother is the city's newly elected mayor, and she's coming. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. Elijah never liked new schools. Each hallway carried the same cold fluorescent glow, but the feeling was always different. In his old neighborhood, people knew his name before he introduced himself. They knew whose boy he was. They'd nod at him from barbershops or corners, call out to his mother with respect. Here, no one knew. After Mayor Daniels was elected, she moved Elijah to Fairmeadow Middle, one of the good schools on the west side of town, the kind with smart boards in every classroom and a PDA that ran like a company board. It was mostly white. The students wore expensive shoes. The teachers called them young men and ladies. Elijah was used to being invisible, but this was different. He noticed the glances the moment he walked in the front doors that first week, the way adults' eyes scanned his hoodie, his shoes, and not his face. He never acted out, never raised his voice. He made the honor roll every quarter. Still, teachers often asked him if he needed help finding his class. He'd just nod and keep walking. His mother had told him not to mention who she was. "Let them see you first," she'd said. "Let them learn your name before they learn mine." She didn't want him growing up in her shadow. So Elijah said nothing. Not when a classmate called him urban during a group project. Not when a teacher handed him a broom, assuming he was a janitor's kid. Not even when he got pulled from lunch to verify enrollment. During his second week, Mr. Langford, the principal, was especially watchful. He had a way of smiling that didn't touch his eyes. He called Elijah a young man with a tight voice, always followed by a question. "Do you belong in this part of the building? Do you have a pass? Are you sure you're in the right class?" Elijah learned not to answer too fast. It only made things worse. Mr. Langford was proud of Fairmeadow's image. He ran assemblies on discipline and professionalism. His office walls were lined with pictures of honor students, all smiling, all dressed like they'd stepped out of a prep school catalog. He once told a parent that Fairmeadow produces leaders, not followers. But the way he looked at Elijah said something else. There was no incident, no loud mistake, no rule Elijah broke. But the tension began to build in quiet ways. Late passes questioned, dress code notes, long stares during assemblies. Elijah felt it most during silence. That thick, heavy kind that comes when you know you're being judged before you've spoken. Still, he never talked back. He never told his mother. He just kept showing up early, walking the hallways like a shadow, until the day he couldn't be ignored anymore. Elijah had learned early that silence was safer than explaining, that adults who already made up their minds didn't want your story. They wanted your submission. At Fairmeadow, silence became his shield. He wore like his hoodie, zipped up and still, but even silence has weight. In the weeks that followed his quiet arrival, the attention on Elijah sharpened. Mr. Langford's questions turned into subtle interrogations. He began calling Elijah to the office for things other students never got pulled for. Untucked shirts, wearing a hoodie indoors, taking too long at his locker. "He just doesn't seem to fit our culture," the principal told a staff member behind closed doors. In class, teachers became cautious around Elijah. They corrected him more harshly than others, overlooked him when he raised his hand. He noticed that his science project, meticulously researched and neatly presented, got AB, while others with half the effort received A's and applause. Still, he said nothing. He kept writing in his notebooks, kept showing up early, head down, hoodie up. At lunch, kids started whispering. You see how the principal always watches him. I heard he got suspended at his last school. Nah, he's just trying to act poor to look cool. The truth didn't matter. The image stuck. The turning point came during a school-wide assembly on pride and presentation. Students were gathered in the auditorium. Mr. Langford stood on stage, projecting slides of model students, polished, smiling faces in tucked shirts and polished shoes. Elijah sat in the third row, hoodie unzipped but visible. His sneakers had mud stains from walking through the park that morning. Without warning, Mr. Langford paused his slideshow and stared directly at Elijah. I see some students in this room who still don't understand what it means to represent this school, he said, his voice calm but biting. We can't rise as a community if some people choose to dress like they're preparing for detention. A few students laughed nervously. Mr. Langford kept going. We don't lower the bar here. We raise students up, but they have to meet us halfway. This is a school, not a street corner. No one said his name, but everyone turned. Elijah didn't move. He didn't speak. His hand stayed folded in his lap. A teacher near him shifted uncomfortably. Another glanced at the exit. The moment passed like a storm cloud, slow, heavy, and unwelcome. After the assembly, Elijah was pulled aside. We've talked about appropriate dress, Mr. Langford said in the hallway, his voice just loud enough for others to hear. If you want to succeed here, start by looking like someone who cares. Elijah looked up, not defiant, not broken, just still. That night, he didn't tell his mother. He ate his dinner, finished his homework, and ironed his clothes for the next day, but he knew now that silence alone wouldn't protect him. The whispers around school changed. Not louder, just more frequent. One morning, a group of students posted a meme of Elijah online, standing outside the school with a caption, "Did he wander in from detention?" It was taken down after a few hours, but the damage had been done. Still, he said nothing. Still, he walked the halls. One teacher, Ms. Cartwright, began to notice. She'd seen the way Elijah kept his materials in perfect order, how he listened more than he spoke. One afternoon, she asked gently if everything was okay. Elijah just nodded. Yes, ma'am. He didn't trust kindness anymore. Not yet. By the end of the month, even the security guards started checking Elijah's student badge more than others. It's just policy, he said flatly. But Elijah knew. Fairmeadow was showing him what it did to students who didn't look the part. And no matter how many awards or grades he earned, it wouldn't matter if his shoes were dirty. He tried to disappear again. Sat in the back of class. Stopped raising his hand. Kept his hoodie tucked into his backpack. But Mr. Langford noticed, and silence to him looked like defiance. The week before spring break, Elijah was called to the office 3 times in one day. Each time, the reason changed. A missing assignment that wasn't missing. A hallway violation that wasn't logged. A noise complaint during study period that no one else heard. Elijah sat in the front office quietly, always quiet, always still. He watched the clock. He watched how other students were greeted with warm hellos and playful banter. He watched how the office staff looked past him, as if his presence required apology. But he stayed. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He just sat. Something inside him stayed strong. Quiet, but anchored, and the tide was still rising. The rain came down in long, tired sheets that Monday morning. It soaked the sidewalks, filled the gutters, and streaked the school's glass entry doors in gray ribbons. Elijah walked through alone, hoodie pulled tight. Backpack held his chest to shield his notebooks. His sneakers made soft squishing sounds with each step. He arrived early as always. It was barely 7:15. The building wasn't fully open yet, but students often waited inside near the front vestibule before heading to lockers. He stood quietly just inside the doors, shaking the water from his sleeves, breathing in the warmth. A voice cut through the lobby. You, stop right there. Mr. Langford stepped around the security desk, his shoes clicking sharply against the tiles. He looked Elijah over like he was trespassing. I said, "What are you doing in here?" "School doesn't open until 7:30. Where are you supposed to be?" Elijah turned, eyes level. "I'm waiting for the hallway bell." Like always. Langford stepped closer, voice louder. "Don't get smart. That hoodie violates the dress code, and I don't appreciate students loitering in the front like this. Take it off and sit over there, away from the doors." Elijah's fingers gripped his backpack tighter. "I'm just early," he said, quiet but clear, "like I am every day." Langford's face flushed. He looked to the front desk staff for support. They stayed silent. "Sit in the front office," he snapped. "You'll wait there until we figure out why you're here. So early dress like this." He didn't say it like a threat. He didn't have to. Elijah walked without a word. He sat in the same chair he'd been made to sit in 3 times a week before. The cushion was cracked. The plastic arms were sticky from years of wear. He set his wet backpack on the floor and folded his hands in his lap. The receptionist handed him a tissue. She didn't look him in the eye. Outside, students trickled in. Some glanced through the glass wall of the main office and saw him sitting there. Again, a few smirked. Others looked away. No one questioned it. Mr. Langford made calls in his office. "I want this student documented," he told someone on the line. Repeated disregard for appearance standards and hallway protocols. He made it sound official. Clean. In that front office. Time slowed. Elijah stared straight ahead. He thought about his math homework, the draw he had started over the weekend, and the copy of Native Son tucked in his backpack. The rain kept falling. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then the door buzzed. A small sound, one the receptionist almost missed. Someone had entered the building from the administrative entrance. The secretary looked up, confused. That door was only for district officials or guests with appointments. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Confident, unhurried. The woman who entered was dressed in a charcoal gray raincoat. Her shoes were soaked, but her face was calm. She looked around once, saw the principal's door. Then her eyes found Elijah. He did not smile. He did not rise. He just nodded once. "Mayor Daniels?" the receptionist whispered, but her voice broke the silence too late. Mr. Langford stepped out of his office, holding a manila folder, still speaking into his phone. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her. "Mayor, Madam Mayor," he stammered. "This is a surprise." She looked at him, not coldly, not harshly, just with the silence of someone who has already gathered all the facts. "I'm here for my son," she said. Langford blinked. He turned slowly, eyes settling again on Elijah, still seated, still soaked, still silent. He said nothing. And in that stillness, the air in the office changed. The receptionist stood straighter. The student aide who had been stapling papers froze in place. Even the security guard outside the glass door shifted uneasily. Elijah remained seated, not because he was waiting, but because he no longer had to rise to be seen. Mayor Daniels didn't raise her voice. She didn't step forward with a flourish or demand anyone's attention. She simply walked to the chair beside her son and sat down. Rainwater slid from her coat in silent drops onto the tile floor. For a moment, the room didn't breathe. Elijah stared ahead. Mayor Daniels rested one hand gently on the armrest between them, not touching him, just close enough. Mr. Langford cleared his throat. "I wasn't aware Elijah was your son." She turned to look at him, her voice even. "That's correct. You weren't." He nodded, fumbling with the folder in his hand. "There's been a misunderstanding this morning. A policy issue. We're very strict here about appearances and behavior during early arrival." "Is that written anywhere in your student handbook?" she asked, calmly interrupting. "The part about being punished for arriving early during a rainstorm?" Langford hesitated. She didn't wait. "I'll need to review all documentation tied to this morning's incident. Any reports made, timestamps, security footage. Also, a copy of your written dress code and a record of which students have been flagged for violations this quarter." The words weren't threats. They were instructions. The receptionist reached slowly for her notepad. Langford nodded quickly. "Of course. I can have that gathered. There's no need to escalate. I'm not escalating, she said. I'm responding. Outside the glass wall, students began to arrive in waves. Some paused, noticing the mayor in the front office. Others saw Elijah beside her and looked again, longer this time. Inside, the student aide set the stapler down gently and left the room. Langford shifted on his feet. It's just, Elijah hadn't identified himself properly this morning. He was standing in the vestibule in a hooded sweatshirt. You know how perception works with these things. She stood now, slowly. I do, she said. I know exactly how perception works. Elijah stood too. Quietly, Langford tried again. You have to understand, we hold all students to the same standards. She met his gaze. Do you? He stopped. The silence wrapped around his answer before he could form it. Elijah didn't speak. He didn't have to. The receptionist stood, holding out a manila envelope. We'll compile everything, Madam Mayor. Mayor Daniels nodded once, then turned to her son. Ready? Elijah picked up his backpack. The puddle beneath his chair had grown, but he didn't seem to notice. They left the office without another word. In the hallway, students parted quietly. No one smirked. No one whispered. Elijah didn't look at them, but they looked at him differently now. Not because of who he was related to, but because of what he had endured, and the way he'd endured it. Have you ever been judged for how you look or where you're from? Share your story in the comments. You never know who needs to hear it. The video surfaced that evening. A 15-second clip taken by a student in the lobby, just before Elijah was pulled into the office. It captured Mr. Langford's voice, sharp and dismissive, and Elijah's silence. Then a wide shot of him sitting alone in the office, hoodie clinging wet to his arms. By morning, it had spread through group chats, parent forums, and the inboxes of school board members. Mayor Daniels never shared it herself. She didn't need to. She arrived that day not as a parent, but in her full role, press badge on her coat, staff in tow. She stood before the school board that evening at the monthly meeting, the same meeting Mr. Langford had planned to present his usual update on cultural excellence. She never mentioned her son's name. Instead, she spoke of a pattern. She recited statistics from district records, the disproportionate number of black boys written up for dress code violations, the lack of formal grievance records despite repeated parental complaints, the schools where students felt unseen not because of their grades, but because of their skin. She asked questions the board couldn't easily answer. What training do our staff receive in bias response? Which students are most often mistaken for intruders in their own schools? How many other boys sat in that chair before my son, and how many more will after? The room was quiet. The superintendent took notes without lifting his head. Across the city, the clip circulated more widely now. Local news anchors posed the question, is Fairmeadow failing its black students? The video didn't show Elijah speaking. That, more than anything, was what stayed with people. His silence carried weight. Back at school, students were different. Not loud, not apologetic, just watchful. Some nodded as he passed. A few held doors open, not out of pity, but something closer to understanding. One teacher, the one who used to overlook Elijah's raised hand, now called on him first. Another asked if he considered joining the Student Advisory Council. He hadn't said yes. Not yet, but he noticed. Mr. Langford stayed behind closed doors most of that week. Then came the email from the district office. Principal Langford has been placed on administrative leave pending a full review of recent events and broader equity concerns. No one cheered. There was no parade, but there was relief. Ms. Cartwright, the teacher who had once asked Elijah if he was okay, began a quiet initiative. Monthly reflection circles in her classroom. No grades. No talking over one another. Just space for students to speak about how they felt in school spaces. It spread. Other teachers joined. The hallway where Elijah had once been mocked now held a new kind of stillness. Not silence out tension, but reflection. The mayor's office issued a press release the following week. The city will launch a district-wide school equity audit, focusing on bias, access, and inclusion. This effort will include student voices. No names. No finger-pointing. But everyone knew where it started. Elijah still arrived early each morning, still walked the same hallway. Now, when he passed the front office, the receptionist nodded with a quiet, "Good morning." Even the security guard lifted his hand in a respectful wave. It didn't erase what happened, but it shifted the weight. And for the first time, the school began to carry some of that weight with him. Spring turned the rain into warmth. Flowers edged along the school walkway. The lobby felt different now, the air less tight, the silences less loaded. Mr. Langford never returned. The district quietly accepted his resignation before the investigation concluded. The final report wasn't made public, but changes began to appear anyway. Dress code policies were rewritten from scratch, this time with student input. Language around professionalism was replaced with words like expression, respect, and equity. No longer were hoodies or cultural hairstyles flagged as distractions. Elijah was asked to be on the Student Leadership Council. He didn't volunteer a speech. He simply nodded once and showed up on time, every meeting, taking notes while others talked. At one meeting, a student hesitated to share an idea. Elijah passed him the notepad and whispered, "Write it down. We'll say it together." And so he did. His voice didn't need to be the loudest. It just needed to make room for others. In late May, the school unveiled a mural on the west wall of the gym. It showed faceless figures standing side by side, hoodies, jeans, braids, sneakers. Underneath, in wide brushstrokes, "See the student, not the stereotype." No ceremony, no ribbon, just paint drying quietly in the sun. Elijah stood near it one afternoon, waiting for his ride. A teacher walked by and paused. "You helped change this place," she said softly. He looked at the mural, then down at his hands. "I just sat in a chair," he replied. But they both knew it was more than that. Mayor Daniels continued her work at City Hall. She refused interviews about the incident, saying only that every student deserves to feel safe in their school, my son included. That summer, the district began training its entire staff, teachers, administrators, even lunch workers, on cultural bias and restorative practices. Some pushback, quietly resigned. Others stayed, learned, tried again. And at Fairmeadow, something rooted itself that hadn't been there before: humility. It showed in small ways. A hallway display showing student stories in their own words. A weekly circle where kids shared challenges without fear of discipline. A new morning routine where staff rotated welcoming students at the door. Every student, every morning. Elijah never told his story during those circles. He just listened. Sometimes that was enough. He still wore his hoodies, still walked alone. But now, teachers waved when they saw him. Students nodded. The school no longer whispered behind his back. They looked at him and saw not just who he was, but who they had failed to see before. The boy who had been mistaken for a problem became part of the solution, not because he changed, but because the school did. The new school year started with less noise, less rushing, less suspicion. Elijah walked past the front office that first morning, hoodie zipped, backpack slung over one shoulder. He nodded at the security guard, who returned the gesture with a calm smile. Outside, his mother waited beside the car. The mayor, wearing sneakers this time and a T-shirt that read, "Protect Black Youth." They didn't speak as he climbed in. They didn't need to. A younger boy tapped on the window before they pulled away. Elijah rolled it down. "Did you help paint the mural?" the boy asked. His voice was small. Elijah shook his head. "No, but you're in it, right?" Elijah glanced back at the school wall. The mural shimmered in the morning light, the hoodie figure in the center framed by warm colors. "I guess," he said. Then he smiled, just a little. As they drove off, the school disappeared behind them. But not the change. The school board announced a long-term partnership with local equity leaders to revise hiring practices, train new principals, and include students on all policy review committees. It didn't undo what had happened, but it made sure it wasn't forgotten. And Elijah, he never raised his voice, never wrote a speech. He just kept showing up, kept walking into spaces that weren't built for him, until they were reshaped by his presence, not through protest, not through power, but through stillness, through being seen. through being undeniable. If this story moved you, share it. Racism hides in plain sight, but so does quiet power. One student's silence changed a school. What will you do with your voice?